Hello students, welcome to PW OnlyIAS. I am here Harpreet Singh with a daily analysis of the Hindu from 1st October 2024. Let's begin today's analysis. So again, this is a Telegram account where you will find this particular PDF along with it the other material that I'll be uploading over here, so that is useful for your preparation for the civil services examination. Let's begin. The topics that have been taken from today's newspaper are: first, the core sector. What does it basically mean? IDWH, which we're going to study what is the full form and what are the components. The editorial, that is basically dealing with the private sector and its participation in the nuclear energy sector. And again, another editorial that is basically mentioning a new and an interesting word, which is silver dividend. Now, this becomes again very important for your civil services examination. Let's begin today's discussion. Okay, now see, in today's first page itself writes the core sector output tanks. So that means moving down for the first time in 42 months. Now see, the core sector going up and down is something that is basically a reflection of what is the stand of the economy right now. You will be seeing the strong growth rate in the core sector signals a positive economic outlook, and a negative would obviously be depicting a negative outlook. Again, the rise and fall keeps on happening, but for us what is more important is, what do you understand by the core sector? But once you understand that, then it is easier for you to correlate what it basically means. When we talk about the core sector, please understand the word core sector in economy refers to certain set of, let us say, sectors which are very, very important for your economy. Right now, see, core sector comprises the 8 key industries. Now, what are those industries? Coal, crude oil, natural gas, refinery products, fertilizers, steel, cement, and electricity. Now, if let us say few or major, or let us say many of them have a negative growth rate, automatically that will impact the economy as a whole. So we will be seeing basically what the core sector is and the other dimensions that are associated with that. Now, in the UPSC examination, please understand, even in the prelims, question related to the core sector has repeatedly been asked. That is why it is important to know what are the various industries, what is the weightage that is assigned while you are calculating the basically the indicators with respect to the core sector, whether the growth rate is taking place or not. We'll see that. Let's see. See, the core sector growth is calculated by combining the growth rate of these individual industries using their respective weight in the overall index of core industries, ICI. That means when we are looking at the this index, is basically tells us whether it is positive, whether it is negative, and that basically calculation is done based on the weightage that each industry has been assigned. We'll see the weight also, because question can be asked and has been asked in the past with respect to the weight that is assigned. Now see, ICI, that is index of core industries, this itself can be asked in your examination. ICI is prepared every month. Now this is again very important. They can ask you in the examination whether it is prepared in once in 6 months or once in a year. No, it is prepared every month and released by the Office of the Economic Advisor, OEA, under the Department of Promotion of Industry, and which is itself under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Now, this is something that you should be very clear about. The name, that is the Office of the Economic Advisor. That is very, very, very important. Okay, now this is something that you have a brief idea. Now, we had mentioned about the core sector growth, which is basically using the weightage of the that is assigned to the industries to calculate this particular index. Now, what is the weightage? See, the petroleum refinery products have a weightage of 28.4%, 28.04%. Electricity has 19.85%. Steel has 17.92%. Coal has 10.33%. Crude oil 8.98%. Natural gas 6.88%. Cement 5.37%. Fertilizer 2.63. So these are the weightages on the basis of what we basically tend to see whether the core sector is going in a positive direction or not, because these weightages basically assign or reflect what implication overall and a ripple effect they're going to have on the economy. Now, let us assume there's a certain problem with the petroleum refinery products. Automatically, that is going to impact the economy at a major extent. So, that is why the weight that is assigned to them is greater, right? So, based on these weights and the growth rate of each industry, a cumulative index is produced, which in that index is known as the index of core industries, and through which we get to know whether the core sector industries as a whole is rising or, let us say, not a positive growth, which we are basically seeing right now, right? Let's move ahead. Next is IDWH. Now see, the basic full form is the integrated development of wildlife habitats. IDWH. Why it is important is, again, you know that it can be asked in your prelims, it can also be asked in your mains examination in GS paper 3 or even paper 1 from the aspect of geography they can ask you. Why this is mentioned is because cabinet approved the continuation of IDWH. The moment it has been approved and it has been told that it will continue, it becomes important for your examination. There are certain components also mentioned over here which we are going to do and understand in detail. Let's see. Okay. Now please understand this about this particular scheme. It is a centrally sponsored scheme. What do you mean by the centrally sponsored scheme? We in the previous editorial discussions had discussed about centrally sponsored scheme and central sector scheme. Centrally sponsored schemes are those schemes in which the contribution is made by the central government as well as the respective state or the union territory government. So that means in this particular scheme, the contribution is made, or let us say financed, contribution is made by Government of India plus state government, respective state governments, right? Clear? This is a centrally sponsored. Had it been a central sector scheme, that would mean that the central government solely is backing through all the finances or putting all the money via its own fund. That is, the central government solely is responsible. Centrally sponsored is state and center both. Aimed at enhancing wildlife protection and habitat conservation. So, what are the basic focus? That is including the wildlife protection and the habitat where the wildlife are basically residing. Now, objectives. What is the objective of this particular scheme? The scheme provides for financial assistance to states and union territory government for the conservation of wildlife and its habitat both within and outside the protected areas. Now, you would be seeing that obviously national parks and wildlife sanctuaries, you realize that these are the places where naturally those wildlife or is basically fauna is there. But on the other hand, it also provides, if it is not within these protected areas, then also this assistance can be given, right? So within the natural habitat and outside also. So this is basically an objective, because why it is important is within and outside the protected areas, we'll be seeing what are the protected areas also. If they're outside it, then also you will get the assistance. This can be asked in your examination itself. So this becomes very, very important. Let's see. When I talk about protected areas, we know national park, wildlife sanctuaries, conservation reserves, and community reserves. These are the protected areas. Anything outside them also can also be financed or are welcome under this particular scheme. Why people will get confused is because in the scheme, though it writes a natural habitat, but along with it, it also mentions outside the protected areas. So do not get confused. This scheme categorically mentions within the protected areas, which are mentioned here, and outside them also. So see, what are the components of the scheme? See, support to the protected areas, that means national park, wildlife sanctuaries, conservation reserves, and the community reserves. So again, an important thing. Next is protection of wildlife outside the protected areas also. Next is recovery programs for critically endangered species and habitats. That means those species which are critically endangered on the verge of extinction, special programs can be run, which you're going to see also. So these are the three major components. First, protection, or let us say support to the protected areas, that is wildlife sanctuaries, national parks. Then you have the community reserves and the conservation reserves. Next is with respect to the protection of the wildlife that are not within these places but outside them, then also you're going to protect them. Then protection of those particular species which are critically endangered or their habitat is endangered. Now with respect to that, do you see subcomponents of IDWH? You would see Project Tiger. Under the Project Tiger, obviously, the protection of cheetah is also involved, a subcomponent of that. Project Elephant, development of wildlife habitat, Project Dolphin, and Project Lion. Now, these are again very, very, very important projects which individually we are going to deal in later chapters also, because we will be studying them in detail, not currently in this particular analysis, but these are the various subcomponents of the IDWH. Clear? Let's move ahead. Now comes a very important aspect, that is your editorial. Today we have taken up two editorials, not one editorial. The reason behind it is that the editorial, both editorials that I've mentioned are unique and very, very important for the civil services examination. Now see them very categorically and carefully. Having private partnership in India's nuclear energy. Now please, what is going on is that when we basically talk about the Atomic Energy Act, that is AE Act, it very categorically says that it is the central government which has the power to basically, let us say, produce, develop and dispose of the atomic energy or material related to that. So the private sector currently have not been involved in the nuclear energy or nuclear energy production. But when we see this year's budget, we realize that silently the word has been mentioned where they are basically trying to have a public player partnership even in the nuclear energy sector. Now, this particular editorial becomes important because what are the possible implications of the private partnership in these particular areas becomes very, very important. So this editorial basically analyzes it from various dimensions that we have to see. Let's begin. First, when we see the introductory passage, we basically see that Budget 24-25 basically mentions that private player partnership is something that they are looking forward, or the government of India is looking forward, where the private sector can also be part, not solely right now, but one or the other way in the process of the nuclear energy generation. Now, how we will be seeing those dimensions also. Right now, SOPs are going to be out. They're going to tell us. Obviously, there are certain things that have been told by the government, but many things are still to be released or told. So let's see. Now, what is going on is, when I'm talking about a private player partnership, why it is becoming important, please understand. See, over here, what is important is that the government right now has an aim to achieve with respect to the energy goals. Like now, if we see over here, you'll be realizing that India aims to achieve 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuels and all by, let us say, 2030. Their aims have been there. So, in order to achieve that, nuclear energy is going to play a very important role. So, over here, solely government of India being involved in the nuclear energy possibly might exclude the opportunity of the private player playing an important role. So that is why the budget over here mentions that. Along with it, the article says in order to achieve the energy goals, possible participation of the private players becomes very, very important. Clear? Next we move on. The article basically mentions about the Atomic Energy Act, the AE Act. See here, the Atomic Energy Act. Now, what does this act basically says? This act very categorically says that it empowers only the central government to produce, develop and dispose of the atomic energy. That means the Atomic Energy Act very categorically mentions that it is the central government solely that is responsible for any sort of production, development or disposal of the nuclear energy, not even the state governments for that matter, only the central government. Now over here, when concept of participation of the private player comes, now this act will have to be amended also. And there are various issues also that are associated. Even we will be seeing that various state governments might also voice their opinion against it, whether private players should be involved or not, because it is very critical infrastructure with respect to the energy security and safety purposes also. Now see, what is going on is over here, one more thing is mentioned is Supreme Court's judgment. Now please understand, few years back, a case was filed with respect to, in the Supreme Court, which basically challenged the atomic energy provision. The provision that was challenged was this particular that I have mentioned over here. A case was filed where the case that basically mentioned that why should the central government solely be responsible for production of the atomic energy and not the private players. At that time, the Supreme Court basically quashed the particular petition. The reason behind it is they said that because according to the established rule, it is the central government that has to basically deal with the production of the atomic energy and disposal, not the private players right now. So we cannot intervene in these policy making right now. So that is why with respect to the Supreme Court judgment also, Supreme Court judgment basically said, we will not intervene in this. We will not be telling the central government to amend the act because it is very critical with respect to security and energy purpose. So next we move ahead is with respect to the liabilities that are mentioned in this paragraph. Please remember, Civil Liability Act, you will be, when you are reading with the nuclear energy purpose, you would have basically dealt or read with them. Now, when the various governments are interacting, or let us say nuclear deals are going on, there are various clauses that are mentioned. In India, you will be realizing that India has a very close relationship with Russia. Now, when the nuclear deal was signed, even with Russia also, it was made very clear that government of India would be the one who will be basically discharging the process of, or let us say, production of the nuclear energy, not the private players. Now again, the problem comes whether the private players should be involved or not, because there is certain, let us say, liabilities that are on the part of government of India also, and certain agreements that have been made with countries like Russia. So one has to be very particular that if you want to create a new agreements, then the previous ones have to be revamped again. So again, certain liabilities also come. Another thing that comes into being is that you would be realizing, it's mentioned in the article also, with respect to compensation. Supposingly a private player is involved in nuclear energy generation under let us say a proper control of the government also, but private player is involved. In case certain mishap happens, who will be responsible for giving the compensation and all? These are certain clauses and issues that were basically happened when we were signing the nuclear deal with the United States also. But in case of private players, who will be responsible, on whom the liability will lie, what will be the compensation, all those dimensions and modalities also basically create a lot of issue. Because in that case, the private player would want that the government of India should take the responsibility, but the government would want the private player should also take the responsibility of any mishap that happens. So there are various issues right now that are still prevalent. We cannot say just merely mentioning the private player participating in the nuclear aspect everything becomes clear. No, it is not so. So as we move ahead, we will be realizing that there are a lot of restrictions that are also there. You'll be realizing that the Atomic Energy Act itself provides a lot of restrictions. Along with it, the various agreements that have been signed with various countries also provide a certain form of restriction with respect to the private participation also, especially with respect to Russia. Now, as we move ahead, we'll be realizing that Niti Aayog had released a paper. Now, Niti Aayog basically says that they are not completely against the participation of the private players. They said with respect to small modular reactors, which are not big, smaller ones, private players can basically play an important role over there. Now, this is why the topic of small modular reactors have been in news also, which we will be covering the next day. We have to deal with this particular topic in detail also. Private players have been promoted that they can basically have their stake in this and they can be in the small modular reactor work with respect to the nuclear energy generation. As we move ahead, now what government of India and along with Niti Aayog is basically having in mind, they are saying that if the private players are allowed in the nuclear energy sector, it will bring an investment of over $26 billion in India. $26 billion in India. This is a possible approximate investment that can come. Now, that is again a very lucrative aspect, but again, we have to see the security and other compensatory and liabilities issues that are involved. Next, as we move ahead, is the article basically mentions that there is a midway to resolve this. They say that what we can do is, all the three authors are mentioned here, what we can do is they can create a public-private partnership firm, an independent firm, let us say, obviously under the government of India only, autonomous working, where now they say there is one option. Second is in a way that public-private partnership is created under which 50%, 51% stake is going to be with the government of India. and 49% with, let us say, a private firm. Now, because it is going to be 51%, that means it is not completely a private firm, because 51% is with government. Now, because it is 51%, it will be subject to the RTI Act also. So people should not be afraid that if the private sector is running a nuclear energy, then in that particular case, they don't have to fear that what with respect to security or whether transparency is going to be there or not, right? So various dimensions are basically resolved if a particular entity is formed with 51% stake of the government and remaining with the private. In that case, what will happen is the private sector can play a very important role. Now, this is being suggested by in this particular article, and along with it, the article also mentions with respect to that, if this is carried forward, it can be a positive step ahead, but it gives a balanced opinion also. See, if you want to implement this, one has to take care of all the back-end aspects in the form what the civil liability acts or whether nuclear pacts that have been signed with various countries, whether they are having an opposition or not, especially Russia, with whom India has very strategic ties, right? It is an evergreen friend of India, and even when the nuclear deal or nuclear pacts with respect to nuclear reactor technology transfer were being discussed, Russia made it very clear at that time also that we will not indulge in any private sector playing a role while the nuclear projects are being implemented in India. So it is quite possible, geopolitical aspects can be that Russia can be against this particular aspect and the private players getting involved. One aspect. Second is that, again, taking all the stakeholders into act. Third is, again, what is being mentioned is that with respect to compensation, liabilities, who will be responsible, that has to be there. Along with it, bringing a consensus also with respect to the political parties also becomes very, very important in order for the amendments to the act to take place. Now, this is what the editorial talks about. Similarly, we'll be seeing more and more details coming out with respect to the private partnership, and we will be discussing it more. This is what the editorial talks about with respect to the private partnership. Let's move ahead. Now, a very important article that has been mentioned over here. Please understand this. You would have seen that a topic of demographic winter was also used in the examination. Now you'll be asking, from where does UPSC get these statements and all? Please remember, it is very less that such types of words being used in the normal news articles. It is very often these types of words that are used in the editorials, because editorials are the one where your expression of your language is made or done by the thinkers or the various authors. That is why again we have a word here, silver dividend. Now you will be realizing what this silver dividend is. See, I'll be giving you certain aspects over here before I read it or before I make you understand what this editorial talks about. Let's see them first. There are two things. Now please understand that. There is a word silver economy and there is word silver dividend. Had this question come in your examination, you would have imagined that, okay, let us say silver mineral is there. Or are they talking with respect to certain minerals, import and export? This would be the first thing that will come into your mind, right? No, that is why we say newspaper reading is very important. So these are new words that keep on coming in the market, and that is why UPSC picks them up. Now see, these two words are very important for understanding this particular editorial. First is silver economy. Now what does the word silver economy mean? The economic activities, goods and services that cater to the elderly people. So first thing is that when we are talking about silver economy or silver dividend, it is basically dealing with the elderly people. Now, there are various interpretations why this word silver is used. Possibly because graying of hair happens, it is silvery look. That is why people might be saying that it is silver. There are various other interpretations also. But again, let us see what silver economy is. Again, the economic activities, goods and services that cater to the needs of the elderly people. That is silver economy. Now this, according to the article also, India's silver economy is close to 73,082 crore. Now this is itself a huge market. Now with respect to what is silver dividend, please understand that is the topic of the editorial also. Growth potential generated by the untapped work capacity among the older people. Do you realize this? Why do we assume that once the people are basically aging, Why do we assume that they are not fit for work? There can be various dimensions where they can be used. That is why one more thing is used. Demographic dividend 2.0. Please understand. Over here, silver dividend is used. That means the growth potential generated by the untapped work capacity among the older people. That means what type of growth can be produced by, let us say, the older people that are there, right? So, because see, the growth potential, that means it is a potential not reaped right now, generated by the untapped work capacity. They're still able to work. Along with it, remember that as the people are aging, they're also generating demand in the market also. That is silver economy, because they will also need their specific dimension. Let us say healthcare products catering to the older people. Now, earlier on, we realized that the life longevity was not very long. When we got independent, let us say in 40s, it was the life longevity. Now, as we move ahead, it is in 70s. That means new set of more elderly people are going to be there in this society, in the Indian society. So that means specific products that was going to be for the needs of the elderly people. So that means an economy that will be running to cater the needs of the older people. That is silver economy. Now, with respect to the growth potential generated by the untapped work capacity, that means older people still can be able to work in various roles and still be contributory to the economic activities in the country. Now, that is what is basically known as the silver dividend. That means what untapped potential through the work aspect they can contribute to the economy. Those older people is known as a silver dividend. Very often, one more thing is demographic dividend 2.0 is also basically related to the concept of silver dividend. Demographic dividend 2.0, that is basically related to the older people. Having understood the concept of silver economy and silver dividend, one more thing that you need to see is age composition. This is according to the 2011 census. The reason, because that is the most comprehensive data. So we are going to deal with it. From 0 to 14 years, it is 30.9% of the population. 15 to 59 is 60.7%, and older people are right now, according to the 2011 census, 8.4. Now, which is going to rise to 13.2 by 2031. Now, do you realize that there is going to be a rise in the number of older people as we move ahead? The reason behind it is that the fertility rate is moving down, right? Declining. So the number of newer children coming in the society will be relatively less. On the other hand, the people over here in this particular age bracket, that is a working age, they are going to age. So more number of people are going to come in this bracket because the medical facilities have improved. So what generally happens is that there will be more people in this particular segment. So that is why reaping the benefits out of them becomes very, very important. Now, please understand, this particular article mentions that rising elderly number is basically being observed, which you've already seen that. It is going to be 13.2% of the total population by 2031. Now they say it is an opportunity to transform this appearing challenge into an opportunity. Now what is basically saying, see, the health care, the health is a core consumption segment over here is 7 billion. Now please understand, when we talk about the healthcare sector, healthcare consumption, what does it mean? Because the older people, let us say, are going to, they're aging. So automatically the needs for respect to healthcare sector, medicines and all are going to rise. Now that sector itself is a $7 billion sector. That means the silver economy associated with the healthcare for the elderly people right now is close to $7 billion, and which is going to rise exponentially. So that means silver economy itself has a very bright future with respect to the article that is mentioned over here. Along with it, what is aspect is the reason behind the rising is because various new problems with respect to, let us say, diseases might rise. Various genetical aspects or problems might arise. Obviously, with age, the deterioration with respect to body takes place. So, let us say various extra supplementary food sector will also rise along with it. So, these things will basically give a boost to the healthcare consumption sector, especially for the elderly or the elderly people. Now, as we move ahead, we need to understand that if we are talking about the elderly people, one is silver economy again, other is a silver dividend. That means if you want to reap the benefit out of the people economically also, we need multiple sector reforms. We need to invest in, let us say, health, Health literacy again becomes very important. That means this article mentions about the topic of health literacy. Now see, you will be realizing during the duration of your, let us say 15 to 59, people are, let us say, consuming anything, unhealthy food, unhygienic food. Then after some time, you'll be realizing that when they enter the old age, they try to suffer a lot. Now, what is important for uh, the important with respect to this article is also not only that sector being made aware, but also people who are entering the old age also close to that, they should be made well aware of the various dimensions with respect to their health, nutrition, food, supplement, and all these dimensions. So what happens is that once the body is fit, that body of the elderly person can be more active also. When it is more active, what will happen is it can contribute positively towards, let us say, various economic activities also, which basically the editorial talks about. As we move ahead, focus on the core, let us say, in this article mentions that Indian form of medicines and other forms can also be playing a very important role over here. So that can also be a part which is basically the article mentioning. As we move ahead, you will be realizing various services like teleconsultation service. You'll be realizing that telemedicine as a concept. What is telemedicine? Over the video call or over the voice call, you can talk or consult the doctors. Now, these things also become very important because it is sometimes very difficult for the elderly people to move from one place to another. So what will happen is that telecommunication systems can be made available. Mental health care services can be there. So these dimensions can basically add for keeping the elderly people mentally also and physically also fitter, so that they can basically contribute more positively towards the various economic activities that can take place. For example, I'll be telling you retired bureaucrats. Now, let us say retired bureaucrats who have a tremendous experience over, let us say, 30 years, 40 years. Now, government can basically take the services in form of consultants, or private sector employment can be there. Even you would be realizing that after Dr. Jaishankar retired as a Foreign Secretary of India, he was heading as a director with Tata Company as a consultant. So do you realize that after the age of 60 also being employed because of the experience that you have, that is basically making the use of the knowledge that you have. That means even the elderly person being involved in some of the other form of economic activities. Now that also requires what? You should be fit enough. If today, if you talk about Dr. Jaishankar, who's a foreign minister right now, you'll be realizing the fitness is again a very important role for him to be contributing to, let us say, in various aspects of society. So that means that is why we are realizing that health aspect becomes very, very important for the elderly people also. As we move ahead, you will be realizing that awareness with respect to entitlements and inheritance. See, as the people get older, we realize that there are disputes in the families also. The article mentions that youngers would be wanting to take hold of the assets they want to do on their own. So what happens is awareness with respect to inheritance, the entitlement also become very, very important. Once they are aware, not only they know their rights, but also they know how to invest, what to invest, because we would be realizing that various companies have come up with investment schemes also for the elderly people, where very small contribution is made and which is basically reaping a lot of benefit for them also. So with respect to that, proper awareness with respect to entitlement and inheritance becomes important. Article also mentions that investment schemes specially catered to the elderly people can be there. Now, people especially who have prior knowledge, their knowledge can be used in these places. They can be made aware of the financial literacy also with respect to these, and they can basically invest in those schemes, which is going to make them more, let us say, in a better financial condition. So specially curated for the elderly people can be there. So this is basically mentioned. Then is next with respect to the digital environment also. Digital environment basically mentions that the elderly should also be made aware of the digital literacy. Now you will be realizing there are various aspects with respect to consultancy also, with the elderly people through their experience throughout their life can make use, maybe consultants in the online firms also, and they have to be at home and they can generate their own economy. Not only this aspect, but also being digitally literate also with respect to certain frauds they might not be aware of. So this particular editorial mentions various dimensions. So on the one hand, how we need to take care of the elderly people, right? And that is with respect to the aspect overall development of the elderly people so that they do not face any issues. On the other hand, it also talks about the silver economy also, how these economy is being boosted because of the new market that is rising because of the increasing number of elderly people. On the third hand, it basically suggests the article that how can the older people basically contribute to the economy and they can themselves gain through that economy, and that would be a basic contribution in the form of a silver dividend, that is demographic dividend 2.0. This is what basically the article mentions over here in the editorial. Hopefully that made sense to you, and this becomes very, very important with respect to the analysis, because these terms of silver dividend, demographic dividend 2.0, all these become important from the civil services perspective. So we'll continue with the editorial analysis tomorrow also. I hope you enjoyed that and learned something new. Take care, and as you all say, Jai Hind.